welcome back. Had a little break there. So before the break, we were talking about terrorism and cybercrime and all these kinds of things and ways that you can protect yourself. But I did make references to the influence of testosterone, and I'd like to delve into that.
References to the influence of testosterone, and I'd like to delve into that.
I'd like to delve into that a little more and look at some studies that have explored this issue, because for those who haven't thought about this or may not have heard about this possibility, I think it might be somewhat enlightening. So I refer to studies of prisoners and those involved in aggressive crimes and this kind of thing, especially, and that the vast majority of those individuals, when tested, showed elevated levels of testosterone. And if you look at the pattern going on with the kinds of terrorism that we're seeing and the individuals that are involved in those terrorist acts, the vast majority of those individuals are young males. And what happens with young males is there is a surge of testosterone. And basically that surge is happening right around the age of 18, and it can continue on for a few years into the early 20s. And it can happen before that as well. It can happen younger, even 14-year-olds. So this surge is happening in very young males who may have a tendency to want to establish themselves, kind of to promote themselves, or to, in a competitive way, show themselves as dominant. And when you look at some of the religious aspects of these things, there's a lot of male domination involved in these acts as well. There's a lot of male domination in the religions associated with these acts. Now, I'm not saying that that is a broad spectrum kind of situation with all of one area of religion, but the specific sects or the specific cults, frankly, that are involved are very much a problem, and lead to these kinds of behaviors. And part of that is not just the testosterone, not just the young males. Another part of it is that typically they're recruiting young males who are in some sense lost and looking for a purpose. And that's an aspect of it as well. And then there's the overall kind of group think that's involved. The, a concept that they all share as a group. And one of the strong influences with young men is peer pressure. And, this has been a factor in, young guys who join the military, and part of what's used to go through the process of boot camp and so on to indoctrinate those individuals. And there's a certain alignment in thought that occurs, and the same kind of alignment in thought occurs in terrorist groups. The young guys join in these groups, and some of them are young ladies as well who are going through similar transitions hormonally. But the majority are young men, and they're brought into the fold, basically brought into these groups, and kind of join in this this practice of being a real man, and getting into all of the ways that are conceived as being a real man in a violent sense, you know, just like we've kind of idolized in the West, a lot of these, like the spy characters like James Bond and the Matt Damon characters. I'm trying to remember the name of his, what is it, Jason Bourne? Yeah, the Bourne series, and and we've got Arnold and Arnold Schwarzenegger and people like that, and even back to Rambo and Stallone and his involvement and all these kinds of things. So the male domination, testosterone elevation combination, and then fighting and dominating and winning the day, and this kind of model of being a man is a lot of what we see that's involved in these terrorist acts and movements. And at the core and at the root and as a major factor in common, we have testosterone. Testosterone being elevated. And studies do show a relationship. I can take a look at one here. So this is NCBI. Let's see, this is National Institute of Health, NIH.gov. Refers to a study done in 2012. Let's see, let me go to the bottom of this. Yeah, so in 2012, let's see. Yeah, a study in the International Journal of Endocrinology on testosterone and aggressive behavior in men. And many aspects of that aggressive behavior and the ties to testosterone are discussed throughout this. And then also the brain activity that's involved that's related to that testosterone activity that leads to aggression. So we have those kinds of things in common with the terrorists that are perpetrating all of these acts. And it's similar to what we see in the prisons with violent prisoners. Testosterone is a big factor in all of those things. So this study that I'm referring to in 2012 states, during the last 2 decades, the study of testosterone's action on the brain has been revolutionized through the use of functional magnetic resonance imaging. And it refers to PET as well, positron emission tomography. And that has allowed much of the exploration and understanding of the effects of testosterone on the brain, and the effects particularly of elevated testosterone on aggressive behavior. And it is a very, very big factor. And we see it with some who say are getting testosterone injections, ending up with very elevated levels of testosterone, and they get very angry a lot. And they, many of them, I'm not saying this is true as a broad stroke exactly, but probably the percentage is higher for those who are really building up that testosterone. They're going to have more of these angry outbursts.
I have a question. I know
Sure.
you're almost time to wrap up. However, listening, and about testosterone, of course, we're applying more. In this case, you're talking about the male species. However, years ago, I was given some testosterone creams to put on, and progesterone, and some other thing. So obviously we have testosterone as well. Does it hurt us? Not hurt us. Does it affect us in the same way?
Well, one of the things that it affects also is libido. And part of the male incentive or the influence on men that testosterone has is a strengthening of the libido and sort of a drivenness toward dominance, male dominance, and dominating women. That's kind of an aspect that's tied to testosterone.
So a woman higher in testosterone doesn't let herself be dominated? Is that
Possibly?
what
Yeah, well, women, obviously, I'm kind of tying it to the fact that the libido is affected by testosterone. Yeah. So in women, it's an important factor in terms of libido. Testosterone is. Mm-hmm. The levels in a woman are not nearly the levels typically of a man. There are some disorders where that can be different. I have been able
to figure that out without having any scientific test or anything. I kind of seen that throughout the years.
Yeah, it's like a factor of 10 difference in the range. Like we're talking in the hundreds versus in men versus 10 to 50 or somewhere in there in women. So, but it is a factor. It definitely is a factor. Yeah.
Well, Doc, not to cheat our audience out of any of your wonderful, valuable information, but we are getting close to wrapping up your show. So, what thoughts are you going to leave us with today?
Just something that occurs to me as a side note is that, I've mentioned that I'm going to be interviewing a CEO of a medical marijuana company. One of the things I'd like to mention is that marijuana, pot smoking is not, to me, generally a seriously negative thing, but it can be, depending on the form. And one of the ways that medical marijuana is being administered is through vaporization as opposed to smoking. And with the smoking, there tends to be lacing of other drugs and these kinds of things, and even intense amounts of THC, leading to things like paranoia. But also, pot tends to create more estrogen, tends to stimulate more estrogen production. It's estrogenic.
Which helps?
Which kind of offsets some of the testosterone.
Oh.
So with the individuals who are smoking pot, the males, there may be a tendency for it to relax. And we see that, people, when they are smoking pot, they tend to be more apathetic. Nothing's a big deal, very relaxed. And I mean, unless it's heavily laced with THC or too much of something that causes paranoia. But generally speaking, there's this tendency to be more relaxed and apathetic and may not really care enough about things in life. That can be a problem. But
doesn't that have to do more, though, with just personality traits and not necessarily the marijuana itself?
Well,
because I hear that over and over again,
yeah.
And I see some people that have lived their lives, because I was born back in the day. I come from the 70s and 80s, and I have friends that have had this as part of their, after coming back from Vietnam, etc., whatever, have had these things in their lives and have functioned quite well. It allows them to cope. Not to cope, but to get through the days in a more relaxed fashion. Mm-hmm. Then there's those that just become lazy and don't do anything, and and so it makes me wonder how much of it is just laying back on excuses.
Yeah, there's always that. There's always that argument. It takes a lot of exploring and understanding and a lot of research to really answer those questions.
Which hopefully, as we continue to listen to Dr. Christopher Jackson on Path to Wellness every Thursday at noon, we will start getting more and more, at least, if not factual total answers, But at least from
Insight.
somewhere that, yeah, we can get some insight.
Yeah, that's part of what I'm trying to do is give people some insight. So there are other studies we can look at about aggressive behavior in individuals. Some of them deal with prisons, some of them deal with terrorism, but all of these behaviors, there is this commonality of the young male, elevated testosterone, and aggression. So
Next week.
just tying a few things together there. We're still working on bringing somebody in from a medical marijuana company, a CEO. We haven't yet scheduled that. I do have some of my schedule worked out, but I do have July 13th, I believe it is. We're going to have a young lady from a nutraceutical company that is more focused on functional medicine and also medical foods. And we can talk more about that. That is an FDA regulated category now. We have the drugs, we have herbs and herbal medicine, and then we have something in between known as medical foods. So we'll be talking about that a little bit on that show. All right, so thanks for listening to A Path to Wellness on rhinoonair.com, named after my practice, A Path to Wellness, in St. Petersburg, Florida. And if you'd like to check that out, you can take a look at www.aptw.net, short for A Path to Wellness, or you can give us a call at 727-329-9637. Talk to you next time.